The Scottish Highlands are places of wild beauty, with rugged coastlines, mist-shrouded glens and ancient castles. But Scotland's Highlands aren't just breathtaking, they're haunted. Behind the stunning landscape lies something darker. Ghosts are said to roam across this untamed land, from battlefields to beaches, from lonely roads to historic castles. The haunted Highlands whisper with eerie tales bound tightly to centuries of Scottish culture and heritage. Welcome to the Ghosts of the Scottish Highlands. Surrounded by acres of picturesque countryside, the elegant blush-coloured Brodie Castle has been the ancestral home of the Brodie clan for over 400 years. It is widely accepted that the Brodies have been associated with the land on which the castle is built since around 1160, when it is believed that King Malcolm IV gave the land to the family. But for centuries, the iconic Brodie Castle has guarded its most terrifying secrets. Beyond the grand halls, opulent chambers and magnificent artwork are the chilling tales of spectral figures who still roam the castle today. This magnificent, well-preserved turreted castle was completed in 1567, but in 1645, Lewis Gordon attacked Brodie Castle, setting it on fire, destroying important archives and documents detailing the origins of the illustrious Clan Brodie. In the 17th century, the nation was divided primarily between the Royalists, loyal to King Charles I, and the Covenanters, supporting Presbyterian reforms and resisting the King's attempt to force Anglican practices on the Scottish Church. These tensions caused riots and escalated into the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, a series of conflicts that further fractured the nation. Clan Gordon were staunch royalists who sided with the King's cause, whilst the Brodies had embraced the Presbyterian cause, making them targets of the royalist forces. The fire ravaged the castle, destroying everything in its path, not just its physical structure, but also the memories, treasures and history that it held within its walls. The castle that had stood as a symbol of Clan Brodie's legacy and endurance was now reduced to charred ruins. But, like a phoenix from the flames, Brodie Castle underwent extensive rebuilding and emerged as the beautiful castle we see today. Architect William Byrne, a pioneer in Scots baronial style, was responsible for turning the ruins into a mansion in 1824. It is home to many valuable paintings, French furniture, unique porcelain, and was home to the ever-resilient Brodie family until the death of Ninian Brodie in 2003. Today, the property is managed by the National Trust. On the 9th of August 1889, Hugh Fife Ashley Brodie, the 23rd Laird, left Brodie Castle to take the waters at Aix-les-Bains in France. He'd been struggling with neuralgic pains, and his physician suggested the warm, mineral-rich waters of the spa resort may help. When he left, the whole castle had been let to tenants, except for one room, Hugh Brodie's study on the ground floor, which was kept locked and shuttered. Hugh had private documents in there from his time in the Royal Artillery, his business ventures, the family's history, and his unsuccessful campaigns to become a politician in both 1879 and 1885. But on the evening of the 20th of September 1889, The castle's butler, one of the members of staff who had remained, startled residents by bursting into the drawing room and declaring, "There is someone in the master's study." The tenants, concerned there was an intruder, raced down the stairs to the private study, but the door was securely fastened shut and no lights were visible through the cracks in the door frame. The group, including the butler, stood in silence. They looked at each other in disbelief as they heard clear, distinct sounds emanating from the room. It was unmistakable. Someone or something was moving objects in the study. Papers were being shuffled, the heavy desk and chair creaked, and there was the sound of a heavy hardback book, perhaps a ledger, being slammed shut. After several seconds, they heard the most terrifying moaning sound, as though a person was struggling to breathe. They waited, gripped by terror and unable to move. And then, without warning, the noises stopped. Everything became silent. Brodie Castle was still once more. The following day, a telegram arrived at the castle. Hugh Brodie had died unexpectedly the previous afternoon. He was only 49. News of the Earl's death in Switzerland puzzled and shocked the castle's residents. They came to the assumption that the strange noises heard in the study had been the apparition of the Earl, who had returned to his study after his death, perhaps to deal with some unfinished business. When the study was unlocked, everything was intact. There had not been an intruder. In the blue sitting room, a phantom uniformed soldier has been witnessed on several occasions sitting in contemplation. Nobody is sure who he is, but records show that the Brodie family and their employees were in active service, in several wars, and sometimes paid the ultimate sacrifice. Alistair Brodie was the second son of Hugh Fife Brodie and Lady Eleanor. He was killed in action on the 11th of December 1899, aged 28, at the Battle of Magersfontein in South Africa during the Boer War. He gained the rank of captain in the 2nd Battalion, the Seaforth Highlanders. Reverend John McEwen, in a sermon, described him as a brave, true soldier who faithfully served his Queen in many lands. Little more than 2 months ago, he was among us, full of hope and kindly feeling and high purpose. And now he sleeps forever under African skies. Could this quiet ghost in the blue sitting room be Douglas Brodie, who was born at Brodie Castle, the 4th son of Hugh and Lady Eleanor? In 1915, he enlisted and was commissioned in the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders. He was attached to the 1st Battalion and in August 1916 was involved in several attacks on High Wood, on the Somme, during the Battle of Pozières. Douglas was killed in one of these attacks on the 17th of August. He is buried at the Caterpillar Valley Cemetery in France. William Cheney, working as a gamekeeper on the Brodie Castle estate, was called up in June 1916. From September 1916, he served in France as a regimental stretcher bearer for the 2nd Battalion, the Seaforth Highlanders. William was reported wounded and missing on the 11th of April 1917 during the First Battle of the Scarpe. He has no official grave, but he is remembered on several war memorials in France and in Scotland. He left a wife and 2 young sons. The identity of the ghostly soldier at Brodie Castle is unknown. Perhaps one of the castle's fine, brave soldiers returns to a place of safety and peace. The spectre of a small dog has been spotted heading towards the children's nursery, and occasionally the ghost of Lady Margaret, wife of the 21st Laird, visits the best bedchamber. She was the daughter of the Earl of Fife of Duff House. She eloped with and married James Brodie, a politician and botanist, in 1768 in Leith. She lived an extravagant lifestyle, and much of the Brodie estate had to be sold. Sadly, she died in a fire in her bedroom in April 1786. It was reported in the news at the time. Lady Margaret Brodie retired about 11 o'clock to her bedchamber. It is supposed her ladyship took a book and, while reading by the fire, her clothes caught. She ran to the bed in order probably to save her child, but the curtain also took fire. She then fell and perished in the flames. Mr. Brodie was much burnt in dragging out of the flames the burnt body of his wife, now a most horrid spectacle, which an hour before was one of the loveliest beings on earth. A letter dated from 1312 from Robert the Bruce to Malcolm, Thane of Brodie, is one of the oldest surviving documents in the National Trust for Scotland's vast collection, and is on display within the castle. The impressive 17th century Dutch Old Masters art collection and the castle's magnificent library, which contains over 6,000 books, wows many visitors. But one painting really stands out and attracts the attention of many people. This painting is in the dining room of Brodie Castle and shows Lady Margaret pointing upwards. The room above the painting is the bedchamber where Margaret accidentally perished in a fire in 1786. A somewhat chilling reminder of the paranormal history of Brodie Castle. The Isle of Skye is known for its dramatic landscapes, rugged mountains, rich history and fascinating folklore. Its name, Skye, likely comes from the Norse words meaning cloud island, and with its natural beauty, historic sites and mystical atmosphere, Skye is a popular tourist destination, attracting visitors from around the world. There are many ghost stories connected with Skye, from the haunted ruins at Duntulm Castle to a phantom horse and carriage at Orbost House. But it's on a mist-shrouded road, where the jagged peaks of the Culloden Mountains loom like dark sentinels over the moorland, that there exists an infamous ghostly apparition. The tale of the phantom wee black car was first reported in the 1940s, but is still whispered among the locals, and its legacy endures in the eerie atmosphere of this hauntingly beautiful corner of Scotland. The vehicle is said to haunt a stretch of hill road on what is now the much wider A87. The first known sighting of the spectral vehicle occurred in 1941, when Dr. Alan MacDonald, a respected local physician, had a chilling encounter on a remote single-track road between Broadford and Portree. As he was driving, he saw a car speeding towards him, its lights blazing through the thickening mist. Fearing a collision, Dr. MacDonald pulled over to let the vehicle pass. But as the car approached, it vanished without a trace, leaving the doctor baffled and unnerved. Dr. MacDonald stated, "I was motoring along the road when I noticed a car travelling very quickly towards me over the hill. Its speed was really terrific, and I drew in to let it pass, but it never came abreast of me. I waited a while, then proceeded forward and found that the car had completely vanished. There was simply nowhere for it to have gone. Donald McKinnon from Sconser, a small village on the east coast of Skye, together with his son, also saw the same vehicle travelling far too quickly for a regular car. Lieutenant Donald Campbell of the Islands Observer Corps was another witness as he drove home to Broadford. He described the car as tearing towards him, lights blazing, but it never passed him. It vanished before reaching him. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, although where it went was a mystery. Reports of this ghostly vehicle continued to surface, and others shared their similar experiences. A local postman, Neil McDermott, was one of many to witness the same occurrence. He said, "I had been out with mail. There had been a full moon, but it had gone down. As I drove along, a cold chill suddenly swept over me. I saw an old Austin travelling very fast, with one light burning bright at the front and a kind of dim glow inside the car. I could plainly see that there was nobody at the wheel. It tore ahead of me and veered to the right, and then just disappeared." Over the years, the vehicle's identity became part of local folklore, with many describing it as a 1934 Austin, though the details of its appearance varied. Some said it was a black car, others claimed it was dark blue, but one thing remained constant. The wee black car always appeared and disappeared in an instant. Many credible people witnessed this strange vehicle, all of whom corroborated the tale of the wee black car, and the sightings intensified as the decades passed. Motorists consistently reported the same eerie sequence. They would see the vehicle hurtling towards them at an impossible speed, and instinctively, following the etiquette of the road, they would pull over into a passing place on the single-track road as a courtesy to allow it to pass. But just as the car was about to overtake them, it would vanish into thin air or disappear around a bend, never to be seen again, leaving the witness stationary in the passing place, ready to give way. The car's appearance seemed to carry a sense of urgency, racing towards an unknown destination, its presence both unsettling and surreal. No driver, no passengers, just an empty, speeding car. Frequently, the wee black car was seen on the stretch of road approaching Culloden, where the ferry would take travellers across to the mainland. Then, on the 13th of April 1959, a particularly tragic event brought the ghostly car to the public's attention once more. A Free Presbyterian minister named Reverend Donald MacLean drove onto the Culloden ferry with 2 women and 2 children as passengers. The car they were travelling in was not the minister's own, but one of the passengers, who was nervous about the careful handling needed to board the ferry. For reasons unknown, the minister made a fatal error. The car, once on board, raced along the length of the ferry deck and plunged into the cold waters of the sea. The water was relatively shallow, around 15 feet deep, but enough to keep the car's roof just above the surface. Onlookers were horrified to see the figures inside the car. A crew member named Alexander Finlayson rushed to the scene, leaping onto the car's roof and using an axe to try and break the windows, but the glass wouldn't shatter. Struggling with all his might, the minister managed to escape, but tragically, the 2 women and the children, a boy named Ian, aged 4, and baby Katrina, just 22 months, drowned. Though the car and the deceased were pulled from the water, its haunting presence seems to linger. The minister, deeply shaken by the loss, later told authorities that he thought the vehicle seemed to be cursed, and he lived a life riddled with guilt and depression. Some say since the tragic ferry incident in 1959, the wee black car seems to have vanished from the A87 on Skye, but others beg to differ. The legend of the wee black car has since become an integral part of the Isle of Skye's folklore. Some locals claim that the apparition is a sign of the minister's eternal penance, while others believe it is the spirit of the vehicle itself, forever racing through the misty roads as if trying to outrun the guilt and sorrow of a long-forgotten disaster that claimed the lives of 4 people so suddenly. Rather than being a haunting of an incident in the past, could the phantom car have been a premonition as such of a future tragedy? To this day, the wee black car rarely appears in its spectral form, haunting the A87, and though many dismiss it as superstition for those who have witnessed it, the tale is not easy to forget. The Isle of Skye, with its haunting beauty and rich history, will always be a place where the line between the living and the dead blurs, and where the past, in the form of a phantom car, never truly fades away. In the far northwestern reaches of the Scottish Highlands lies a remote beach of such haunting beauty that it feels entirely forgotten. Sandwood Bay is an isolated stretch of golden sand, bordered by towering cliffs and miles of untamed moorland. There are no roads here, not for 4 miles, no buzzing city lights or sounds of modern life. But beneath its serene, untouched surface, something paranormal stirs. This is the site of centuries-old shipwrecks, eerie ghost sightings, and one of the country's most curious encounters. This pristine beach, with its tranquil beauty, has earned the grim title of Scotland's shipwreck graveyard. Author Seton Gordon, during walks in the area in the 1920s, observed several submerged wrecks. In his 1935 book, Highways and Byways in the West Highlands, he wrote, "I was astonished at the number of wrecks which lie on the fine sand of this bay. All of them are old tragedies. Some of the wrecks lie almost buried in the sand, far above the reach of the highest tide. It is said that the spirits of those lost to the sea linger here. The restless souls of the drowned forever walk these remote shores. The continual roar of the breaking waves and the high-pitched screams of the seagulls remind us of the long-established belief that the birds are in fact the souls of drowned mariners. It seems ships, galleons, fishing boats and Viking longships have all been caught in the dangerous grip of treacherous currents and consumed by the sea here, their timbers shattered against the jagged rocks that lurk just beneath the surface. Even after the lighthouse at Cape Wrath was built in 1828, the coastline's deadly embrace continued to claim victims, making the area abundant with driftwood. Local legends speak of a Spanish galleon lost to the stormy seas, one of the Armada's great vessels doomed to wreck along the bay's eerie shores. The galleon's treasure, cursed and forever buried beneath the shifting sands, is still guarded by the spirits of the dead. On stormy nights, the chilling cries of those lost at sea can still be heard, carried by the wind. In 1588, the Spanish Armada was significantly impacted by a powerful storm known as the Protestant wind, which scattered the fleet and forced many to retreat and sail around Scotland and Ireland. At least 27 Armada ships foundered on this journey. Some believed the storm was a divine symbol of Elizabeth I's right to rule. In the autumn of 1948, a local man and his son from the nearby hamlet of Old Shaw Moor were collecting driftwood. Alone on the desolate beach, they gathered the timbers from a long-forgotten wreck. As the evening drew in, they stacked up their findings onto a cart, about to head home, when their pony became distressed. The men froze and became aware they were not alone. Standing close to them was a man, a bearded sailor, dressed in sea boots, a faded sailor's cap, and a dark, weather-stained tunic with shiny brass buttons. This mysterious man looked angry and disapproving, and certainly wasn't there previously. The sailor cried out in a harsh, guttural voice, "Take your hands off what doesn't belong to you, and leave my property." Horrified at this encounter, the men dropped the wood they'd gathered so laboriously and fled from the presence of the sailor. They both agreed there was something uncanny and otherworldly about the sudden appearance of this strange figure. Whoever this mysterious man was, he was angry, abrupt, and possessive of the beach. On the 8th of August 1949, the same figure was seen, this time by a fishing party and their gilly, from the Garbett Hotel in Kinlochbevy. On this occasion, the ghostly sailor was seen standing close to a sandy knoll before walking over the crest of a sand dune. The entire party saw him and noted the cap, the glint of the buttons, before witnessing him disappear behind the crest. The gilly was sent to confront the man and ask him what he wanted. But he returned to the party, shaken and deathly pale. He couldn't find the man, there was no one there, and neither were there any footprints where the man had been, other than his own. He was witnessed in July 1953 by 3 visitors from Edinburgh who made the hike from the car park in Blair Moor and were treating themselves to a well-earned picnic and rest in the sand dunes in the southeast of Sandwood Bay. They were startled to see the figure of a large man with a beard staring down at them from the crest of a nearby sand dune. They observed him for at least 3 minutes before he took several steps backwards and vanished. When the visitors went to investigate, again there were no footprints. On another occasion, 3 men from Kinlochbevy, Alexander Gunn, George Mackay and William MacLeod, went to Sandwood Bay to look for a missing sheep. It was a clear night with a bright moon, and the men spotted some driftwood coming in on the tide. Alexander Gunn attempted to grab a fine plank of timber floating nearby and scrambled over some rocks to reach it. As he did this, he witnessed a heavy-set man with black whiskers standing on the sand between the rocks. The men were puzzled. The ghostly sailor had suddenly manifested on an entirely empty beach. They watched him slowly walk behind a rock ledge and disappear. 14 days later, an Irish boat was wrecked off Sandwood Bay, and the 3 men together went to gather driftwood. It was a shock that the body of one of the crew had come ashore between the same 2 rocks. He was unshaven, and all 3 men who saw the body had no difficulty in recognising it as that of the same man they had seen a fortnight earlier. About a mile from the beach stands the ruin of Sandwood Cottage, a lonely, roofless relic of a crofter's home. The area has been largely uninhabited since 1847, when the land was cleared for sheep farming as part of the Highland clearances. This highly controversial process involved removing peasant families and communities from land across Scotland from the mid-18th to mid-19th centuries. These evictions were primarily conducted so that landowners could increase their income by repurposing the areas for sheep and cattle farming. Several shepherds' huts remained and were occasionally occupied until around 1940. Back in the days before it became a ruin, an old shepherd who had been with his flock all day decided to sleep in the cottage overnight. He went upstairs to the room above the kitchen, and as he was falling asleep, he heard the distinct sounds of footsteps pacing across the ground floor. He knew he'd bolted the door, and, concerned, he lit a candle and proceeded to search every room. As he descended the stairs, the sounds ceased, but he couldn't find a rational explanation for the footsteps. Angus Morrison, a local fisherman, spent the night in the cottage, but he was disturbed by his dog's sudden barking, heavy footsteps approaching the outside of the cottage, and tapping on the window pane of the ground floor. When he looked towards the window, he saw the face of a bearded man, wearing a sailor's cap and a coat with brass buttons. Angus opened the door quickly and looked around the vicinity of the cottage, but there was no one there. On a separate occasion, he was woken by the sensation of being choked by a thick black mass, like a blanket, that pressed heavily on his chest. After this encounter, Angus Morrison refused to spend another night at Sandwood Cottage. In the 1970s, two walkers from Surrey were following the coastal path south of Cape Wrath to Kinlochbovie, but overcome by fatigue, they decided to spend the night in Sandwood Cottage before continuing their journey in the morning. At dawn, they fled and relayed what a ghastly night they'd had to the local postman. They were disturbed by the sounds of glass being smashed. The entire cottage vibrated as if in a terrible storm, and doors slammed shut. A sound similar to a horse trampling across the first floor lasted around 5 minutes, and the hikers were so terrified they sat together, dreading the next set of disturbances until it was light when they fled. But who is this ghostly figure? Could it be the local hermit, James McRory Smith, who lived near the bay for over 30 years? He was a reclusive man, avoiding company and retreating to the bay after the tragic death of his wife in a car crash. He lived in a remote bothy, east of the bay, with no running water, no electricity and no telephone. He passed away in 1999, but some people believe his restless spirit still lingers in the shadows of the bay. In his lifetime, he indicated his belief that the supernatural was at work close to his home at Sandwood Bay. The mysteries of Sandwood Bay extend far beyond its ghostly sailors. The waters here have long been associated with older legends of selkies and mermaids, sea creatures that lure men to their deaths with their beauty and song. Fishermen speak in hushed tones of strange, beautiful women seen sunning themselves on the rocks, their long hair glistening in the light before they vanish into the waves. One local, Alexander Gunn, told a tale that still lingers in local legend. He spoke to author R. MacDonald Robertson in 1939, who wrote, "On the 5th of January 1900, Gunn's collie suddenly let out a howl and cringed in terror at his feet. On a ledge above the tide, a figure was reclining on the rock face. At first he thought it was a seal, then he saw the hair was reddish-yellow, the eyes greenish-blue, and the body yellowish and about 7 feet tall. To the day Gunn died in 1944, his story never changed, and he maintained that he had seen a mermaid of ravishing beauty. Could these mysterious sea creatures have played a part in the countless tragedies that have befallen the sailors of the northwest coast of Scotland? Some believe they still call to those who venture too close, dragging them beneath the waves, never to be seen again. Whether you believe in the restless spirits of drowned sailors or dismiss the tales as products of imagination, one thing is certain. Sandwood Bay is a unique, mysterious and hauntingly beautiful location. There is a silence on Culloden Moor that unnerves even the bravest souls. Here, just a few miles east of Inverness, lies Drumossie Moor, the site of the last battle ever fought on British soil on April the 16th, 1746. Jacobite supporters seeking to restore the Stuart monarchy to the British thrones gathered to fight the Duke of Cumberland's government troops. It should have lasted hours, but it was over in less than 60 minutes, and yet some say the battle never ended at all. It may have been the last battle, but the phantom figures of the combatants fight on to this day. Every year, on the anniversary of this bloody battle, the air changes. Winds howl across the desolate battlefield and bring with them the cries of the dying, the clash of steel, the roar of cannon, and the final war cries of men charging to their deaths. And those who fell begin to rise up. In 1745, the leader of the Jacobite forces, Charles Edward Stuart, sometimes referred to as Bonnie Prince Charlie, led a final attempt to restore the Stuart monarchy. Backed by Scottish clans unhappy with British rule, he marched into England with 5,500 men, reaching Derby. But, lacking French support and outnumbered by government forces, he was forced to retreat to Scotland. His army was weakened, tired and demoralised. Then came Culloden. On this very battlefield in 1746, the government's well-trained army, led by the Duke of Cumberland, crushed the Jacobites. The boggy terrain ruined the Highlanders' traditional tactics to charge, and heavy artillery fire broke their lines. Those Jacobites who reached the redcoats were met with a deadly new tactic, a bayonet thrust not at the man before them, but to the right, under the Highlander's raised sword arm, past his shield, straight into the heart. Poorly led and outmatched, the Jacobites suffered around 1,500 deaths in under an hour, while the redcoats lost relatively few soldiers. Survivors were hunted down and executed. The defeat ended the Jacobite cause, and with it, any real hope of a Stuart restoration. The rebellion died that day, but something else, something darker, remained. Today, the landscape remains largely unchanged since that fateful day in 1746, and is a haunting reminder, with markers and a cairn standing in tribute to the clansmen who fought and fell. Culloden saw the end of Highland ways of life that had existed for centuries, as government forces ruthlessly subjugated Jacobite sympathisers in the aftermath. The stones stand as weather-worn markers for the fallen clans: Fraser, MacDonald, Cameron, Stuart. Beneath each mound, the bones of the dead lie in silence. Close to the impressive cairn, many have reported seeing and hearing the apparition of a tall man, in full Highland dress, his pale face looking utterly despairing. He walks alone between the mounds. If approached, he speaks only one word, defeated, then vanishes. In August 1936, a woman from Edinburgh visited the battlefield. Drawn to one of the grave sites, she noticed a piece of Stuart tartan cloth that had blown down from the stone, gently shifting in the breeze. She lifted the cloth. Beneath it, the pale, bloodied face of a dying Highlander stared up at her, his dark hair visible, eyes full of pain, lips whispering unintelligible final last words. His clothes were dirty, muddy and made of Stuart tartan. She turned and fled from the scene. When others arrived, the mound was just earth again. The cloth lay flat and still. A National Trust for Scotland employee once recorded an incident regarding two women whose curiosity had turned to quiet dread. The women lived nearby, not far from the site of one of the most haunting episodes in Jacobite history, the aborted night march to Nairn on the eve of Culloden. On that ill-fated night, Charles Edward Stuart had ordered his weary men to march 12 miles under the cover of darkness. Their plan was bold: to ambush the Duke of Cumberland's army whilst they still recovered from the revelry of his 25th birthday. But the heavens opened in fury, and the dense Highland woods closed in. The army, split into two confused factions, lost its way beneath a relentless downpour. By 2 a.m, one division turned back to Culloden in quiet despair. The other pressed forward, blindly, trudging through the night, until they too were recalled just an hour before the dawn. By this point, the Duke's camp was almost within earshot. It is said that in those early hours of the morning, the surrounding woods were thick with the sound of men retreating, mud-caked boots, slapping the earth, all rushing back to Culloden for much-needed rest and food. The two ladies at the visitors' centre knew the history. They had read about it in books and had begun their own investigations. But they came to Culloden not for folklore, but for answers to a puzzling question. One of them had brought a map with her. When the member of staff produced a larger, detailed map of the area, the lady's hand began to tremble. As she pointed, she exclaimed, "There, that's my house." The old map showed it clearly. The path of one division of Bonnie Prince Charlie's doomed men ran straight through her garden. The woman explained that for years she had been woken in the night, always around the same time, just before the dawn. She would hear the sounds of numerous marching boots, muffled orders, and the clink of weapons passing by, rushing through her garden. This had happened roughly 5 times in 10 years. Could this be the residual echo of history? Are these phantom Jacobite soldiers still trapped in the eternal retreat, doomed to flee again and again through the early hours of that cursed April morning? Some say Culloden's dead never found peace. At Culloden, visitors can see a source of water and a memorial stone. This spot became known as the Well of the Dead because it is said that the chief of Clan MacGillivray died here. The story tells that he was wounded and retreated. He heard the dying moans of a young drummer boy, and MacGillivray quenched the boy's thirst from the water of this well. Artist and campaigner for Scottish independence, Wendy Wood, detailed 2 separate incidents at the Well of the Dead in her 1970 autobiography, Yours Sincerely for Scotland. Whilst visiting the Well of the Dead, she had looked into the water, and instead of seeing her own reflection, she saw the face of a man with an anguished look, wild eyes and long black hair. She described the experience as quite horrible. On another visit with a tour group just a few years later, She was back at the Well of the Dead. She wrote, "Here I was at Culloden, and with the eager desire to be able to reassure myself that the previous experience was all bunkum, I hurried over to the well. I bent over. The water was even further down, but there was the same man's face, his eyes staring into mine with agony, a cut right across his brow." At this moment, Miss Wood felt intense pain across her own forehead. She moved away from the well to rejoin the group, but she was visibly distressed and disturbed by the experience. She wrote that it took several days to recover and for the pain to leave her left eye. Diana Gabaldon, author of Outlander, once stood on Culloden Moor. She'd walked many battlefields before: Gettysburg, Hastings, Bannockburn. The author became very emotional in an interview with the BBC. "Most of them are not haunted. That one is. Without being metaphysical at all, I can feel the people there. I can't talk about them or I'll cry." After the battle, the fallen lay on the wet, windswept moor for several days, before being buried in mass graves. Today the site is a war grave, and it is said that the heather refuses to grow atop of the burial mounds, and birds do not sing in their vicinity. It seems Culloden is still haunted by those who fell on that brutal day in 1746. I really hope you enjoyed these stories from the beautiful Highlands of Scotland. Once again, it was very difficult to narrow down the stories to just a select few, but there's much more to come from this area and from Scotland as a whole. I absolutely love Scotland, and I will be covering Edinburgh and Glasgow, both cities I love, in the future. Today I have some more ghost stories for you, some postcards, and possibly the most beautiful menu I actually own. I don't think we've had a menu for a little while, so I hope you'll enjoy having a look at what's on offer today. If we just go back to the wee black car of Skye, some say that after the ferry incident, the wee black car was never seen again. That was it. It literally vanished, and you can find interviews on YouTube of people who've seen it and remember it clearly. It's important to note that the ferry was a bottleneck of sorts at the time because it was the only way to get from Skye to the mainland, but now there's a bridge, which opened in 1995. In January 1992, The Scotsman published an article called "Haunted by a Fateful Future", and in the article the author writes about the ferry incident and states that the wee black car was never seen again. The author also states that the incident with the ferry happened in 1962, which is incorrect. But about a week later there was a letter from Dr. Martin Moore, who claimed to have seen the car in the 70s. So let's have a look at his letter. "Sir, it was interesting and gratifying to read the article Haunted by a Fateful Future. However, his account of the fast forward and the wee black car of Skye needs to be updated. He mentions that after 1962 the wee black car was never seen again. In fact, I, together with a climbing companion, saw it in the early 1970s. The situation was precisely as described in the article. We pulled into a passing place between Caerleacon and Broadford to let a black Ford pass, which we saw approaching us along a long, straight stretch of road. Our passing place happened to be just before a small hump in the road, and consequently about 50 yards or less of the road ahead was blocked from our vision. We saw the car approach, then disappear from view, hidden by the hump in the road. It never appeared again. It was impossible for it to have reversed or moved off the road without us seeing it. In fact, we made a point of searching the sides of the roads for tracks, but nothing. I might add, we knew nothing of the wee black car story." And then he goes on to express his frustration that he's been mocked and disbelieved because of this incident on Skye. There's another very interesting ghost story linked to Sandwood Bay that I thought I'd share with you. Peter Underwood wrote that a woman from Edinburgh, but living in London, received a small piece of wood from the old staircase that had existed in Sandwood Bay cottage. She had it as a sort of souvenir, I suppose. And since this fragment of wood had been in her possession, all sorts of odd things had happened in her flat. Crockery had fallen onto the floor from the work surfaces for no reason, knocking sounds and heavy footsteps were heard at night, and the smell of alcohol and tobacco seemed to come from nowhere. Then she caught a glimpse of a bearded sailor who turned and faced her before disappearing into thin air in her sitting room close to the window. Apparently, this woman is a well-respected professional, not prone to exaggerating stories, and she started to keep the piece of wood in a box in a drawer, and it still rattles and moves on occasion. How spooky. Is this an example of a haunted object? What do you think? Let's just go back to Culloden for a moment, and I want to mention this rather interesting place called Old Leonac Cottage. Now, it's said to be the only surviving building after the battle, although I think it's been rebuilt in various guises since 1746, and it was inhabited until 1912, and it's now kept by the National Trust. The thatched roof on the cottage is actually made from heather collected from the battlefield. The cottage, back in the day, would have had surrounding barns and other buildings, but these were burnt down when the government redcoats found 30 wounded Jacobites seeking refuge within them. So they barricaded the barn and burnt the Jacobites. I do have this rather lovely postcard from the cottage, and this was posted in 1972. Spent the weekend in Inverness, visited Fort George and Culloden Moor, most impressed. What with the low-lying cloud on the mountain tops and the graves of the Scottish dead, one could almost see and hear the battle. Car running perfectly. Hope to see you soon. This person has clearly been moved by the battle site at Culloden. Such an evocative place. If you do decide to visit Culloden, you could stay in the haunted Culloden House Hotel. Bonnie Prince Charlie requisitioned Culloden House as his lodging and battlefield headquarters, and he commandeered the house for 3 nights prior to the battle. He and his army have been seen within the grounds marching, and rooms 5 and 14 are said to be haunted by Charlie himself. Years ago, the proprietor saw a tall man in tartan walking along the corridor late at night, and he entered a room at the far end. The proprietor hurried after the man and opened the door to the room with a master key, but there was nobody there, and the room was empty. So I have this absolutely wonderful menu for you today, and it's from the QE2, Cunard's transatlantic ocean liner, which operated from 1969 until 2008. This is a celebration menu from her 40th birthday because it's really important to recognise how important shipbuilding is in Scotland's history. And today she's a floating hotel in Dubai, but she was the flagship of Cunard until Queen Mary II came along in 2004. The QE2 was launched and named by Queen Elizabeth II in September 1967 on the Clyde, and the Queen used the same golden scissors that her mother had used to inaugurate the Queen Elizabeth and her grandmother had used to launch the Queen Mary. One of my absolute favourite photographs of the QE2 is this one, largely because it contains my hero David Bowie, who used to enjoy travelling on the QE2 and other ocean liners throughout his career. And to be honest, I don't blame him. He could probably bring his family and spend a leisurely 5 or 6 nights crossing the Atlantic in private, away from the press. And Bowie wasn't keen on flying, certainly in the 70s when he was touring, and I read that he saw a Japanese psychic who told him in 1973 that he'd be killed in a plane crash. And for 5 years, from 1972 until 1977, Bowie didn't fly at all, which made his touring unusual because he had to do loads of it by road, sea or by rail. To find out about my trip across the Atlantic on the Queen Mary II, take a look at my video, The Ghosts of New York City. I'll leave a link below. Let's go back to the menu. So to begin with, we've got smoked salmon with a sweet mustard sauce, ham and gorgonzola cheese, various soups and salads. And then for the main course, we've got cannelloni pasta, seared cod and butter with bacon, steak and peppercorn sauce, and Cornish hen with stuffing and vegetables. All looks rather impressive. And then for desserts, we've got peach flambé, lemon and lime brulee, chocolate brownie and bread and butter pudding. Sadly, they don't give you menus like this anymore on board Cunard. They have a menu with a printed insert that they change every day, which is probably better for the environment. But I miss things like this. I suppose it's the same on a lot of flights these days, but no menus anymore. And then on the last pages, we've got a list of all the Cunard ships built in Scotland. How cool is this menu? And finally, I've just got this postcard from 1971. Dear Billy, I have been to Skye and now I am in Harris. I have been in for one swim so far. We did not get very nice weather in Skye, but it is nice in Harris and Lewis. I hope you are having nice weather, from William. And that postcard just shows that the Brits are obsessed with the weather. I particularly like the very childlike handwriting on this one. Anyhow, so that's it from me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe and hype the video. I don't actually know what that means, but I'll just say take care, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care, guys.